And thank you to the Cisneros family in terms of being here, and to you as a group to be here. It's an honor. I've only been to Miami in July and August. So this morning was a very different experience. I'm almost tempted to move here, but I am very excited to be with you. Let me tell you a couple of things from my perspective about leadership, and I'm sure you have your own view on this, and I respect and honor that as well. To me, leaders create a space where insight emerges and engages people. Leaders create a space where dreamers can dream, and the engagement part is dreamers can do. And what we're going to focus on this morning is really the dreaming part. In other words, how do we identify new opportunities, and how do we grab them and take them forward? This is not unusual because the world we live in is full of change. I'm old enough to have lived in a world where all I knew was rotary dial telephones. Remember that world long ago? Just yesterday, as I was walking through the airport coming here, it still is a marvel to me that we can wander around in a building with something hooked to our ear and talk to somebody else. It's a very different world. And 2 weeks ago, I was doing some taping in a studio like this, and I was talking to the cameraman about his work. And it was fascinating. I said, what's it like? And he looked at me and said, it's just unbelievable. And what are you talking about? And he said, every day there's new stuff on this camera that I've got to figure out. It's either new software or new hardware or new something. It's like my job is getting turned upside down every moment. It's real hard work just to keep up with the equipment. And that's not uncommon. I mean, again, it's not just the cameramen of the world. Those operators make a difference. But it's also leaders like you live in a world full of uncertainty. There's been an interesting study last year done by IBM, surveyed 1,500 CEOs around the world, asked them, what's going on in your world? What was the fundamental response? The world's full of uncertainty. Does that feel like your world? Yep. Full of it? Well, their response then to that, let's see, do we have my slides up somewhere? Small detail. Small detail. We'll get it up. Somebody will get it up. World full of uncertainty. You ask CEOs, how do you then respond to that uncertainty? What's the most important skill that you and your leaders need to have to respond to the uncertainty? The skill that they described is basically creative leadership. It's innovation. That's the thing that matters. Have we got it up yet?
It's coming up.
It's coming?
Yeah. There we go.
We're good. That's the message. Innovate. Now, from what I heard this morning, are you getting the same message? Have you got the message? That's the question. Let me explain what I'm talking about. Here's a quick video about the message of innovation.
Innovation Man, I'm here to get you all fired up about innovation. Are you fired up? I'm fired up. Are you fired up? I'm fired up. I said, are you fired up? Yes. Why are you fired up?
I don't have any idea.
Okay. It's a great word that sometimes people don't quite know. What are we talking about? What does that mean? And my hope is that by the end of this day, and particularly by the end of the hour or two I have with you to work with you, you'll have a better answer about why would you want to be fired up about innovation. So let me start with a story, and it goes way back in time. It goes back to the 1900s. None of us lived then, but in that point in time, late 1800s, early 1900s, if we were going to be, there we go. If we wanted to have a picture taken, we probably would not be taking the picture. We would have gone to a tent where they had those big, huge cameras, and somebody else would have done it, a professional. In that world of photography, that industry, that was the way pictures were done in 1900. You've got a guy named George Eastman who actually bought the big tent and all of the equipment to go on vacation in order to take pictures. And at that point, once he tried to pack all that stuff into his vehicle, he realized there's got to be a better way. He then invented film that could go into cameras, which was completely different from the film then. And he then invented this camera called a brownie box camera. He sold it for $1. Overnight, that camera changed, revolutionized, disrupted the entire photography industry. It made cameras available to anybody. And it made it available to the point where if you go from that 1900 when they were the disruptors, this is 1930. A little bit difficult to see, but it's my mother on the steps of the St. Madeleine Church in Paris. She's the third woman from your left there. 1930s, that picture would not have been taken without the Kodak camera. They were the monopoly of the photography world at that point. And then you fast forward another 3 or 4 decades. You've got the 1970s. In that monopolistic environment where they were making lots of money from their film and their cameras, inside of Kodak, you know the story, they were the developers of the electronic camera. And you also know the story that the metrics, the systems, the approach, the management, the senior leadership basically said, we don't care about going a different direction because what we're doing today is actually incredibly profitable. They were good managers doing great work who set that idea aside. Then you fast forward from the 1970s to the 2000s. This is 2011, last year. My daughter was working in Paris. The granddaughter of my mother, standing on those same steps, having her picture taken. Yeah. With what kind of camera? A phone, exactly. Who would have guessed? Exactly. The disruptor, as you well know, got disrupted. And this is the fundamental challenge in business for any company that has a history. Kodak had a history of success, incredible success. And the issue is that when we start a company and grow it, we put in system, structure, and process that makes it successful, it's mature, and it's generating a lot of revenue and cash. Now, at that same point in time, what we have to do to avoid getting the disrupted on us is to be able to essentially chase after new ideas at the same time. That's the trick. How do we build a new business model when we already have a great one going? And one of the interesting questions here is, how long does it typically take to build that new business? What's your best guess? How many months or years?
10 years. 10 years.
It's a pretty good guess. We think of, internet speed and all that sort of quickness. How long did it take Amazon to become a viable, successful business? It was almost 10 years. And the reality becomes, if we're on that curve of success, and if it takes 10 years to get a new curve going, it's going to take work today that will build the business of tomorrow while we're still riding that wave of the present. Does that make sense? That's the challenge. What I will propose is there's a way of doing both. And what I'm going to suggest is, instead of getting disrupted ourselves, we can disrupt even when we're in a successful business. And here's how I would suggest that we do it. Clayton Christensen at Harvard, a guy named Jeff Dyer at Wharton, we basically got together about 9 years ago, and we had a question that I asked Clayton, and that was essentially, Clayton, you're the father of disruption. You've studied disruptive companies, people that change the whole terrain of an industry. I want to know, how did they do it? How did they get their ideas? Where did they come from? Clayton, who's taller than me, scratched his head and he basically said, I don't know. I know what they look like, I know what a disruption is, but I don't know where the ideas come from, and we decided, let's go figure it out. Now, from talking with you, it sounds like many of you have either read the article or the book. How many are familiar with these ideas of what we discovered? We got a lot of you in here. So I'm going to sort of shoot through them. We're going to do some things with them. Here we go. We interviewed about 100 disruptors, people like Jeff Bezos at Amazon, Nicholas Zenstrom at Skype. Bezos, Amazon completely disrupted the book industry. Borders just went out of business. Skype completely disrupted the telecom industry, making telephone access free. You know the deal. The question becomes, you go talk to Nicholas Zenstrom at Skype, Jeff Bezos at Amazon, you ask them, what were you doing? How did you get your ideas? What was going on when you were figuring out what that new business would be? We talked not just to those two people, but 100 of those folks. And at the end of the day, we then realized they've got a consistent story. You look at the transcripts, you look at what was going on, they were doing things that looked the same. Now, we also then moved from those 100 folks and essentially went to almost 6,000 people. We created an assessment of these skills that innovators use to get disruptive ideas, surveyed entrepreneurs, innovators, leaders from around the world, and essentially, we're trying to figure out if they do the same things, will they get great ideas? And the answer is yes, they do. We don't have to be super famous to get great ideas. We just have to do what they do. So here we go. What do they do? What were these innovators all about, and were they born that way? Do innovators get born as innovators, yes or no? No? Anybody yes?
Yes.
We got a few yeses. You got a few yeses. You've got 3 kids. We were talking on the bus here this morning, right? 12, 9, and 6. They're either born innovators or not. Now, I'm not a mother. Obviously, right? We have 7 kids. And each one of them, at least from my wife's account, behaved differently before they were born. You know, some were very wiggly and some were not. They had a personality before they came here. Now, there's some truth to that. And let me go to the research real quickly on this because it's an important issue. Are we born innovators or not? The research, which I didn't do, but people in 5 or 6 big studies around the world did, they basically were trying to figure out, is it a born skill to be an innovator? And they took identical twins, separated at birth, grew up in different environments, and then asked them about creativity and tested them on creativity when they were adults. Here's what they discovered. About 33% of their innovation skills were actually genetic. Does anybody have young kids or grandkids who like to put their hands in things and just always touch and explore and experiment? That's because they have more dopamine 4 in their head. It's part of what's the chemical makeup in their brain, and I've got more sweat on my head than dopamine 4 right at the moment because I'm not used to the bright lights, so bear with me. Be a little patient on this one, a little warm for me, but anyway. So basically, the dopamine 4 leads them to have great new ideas, and that's the issue. It is partly genetic. Now, what's the story here? 1/3 of it roughly is genetic, 2/3 is. It's the world we live in. It's the world we grow up in. It's the world we work in. And so we go back to that world of 4-year-olds. I don't care where we are. Venezuela, Argentina, Japan, Australia, the Middle East, Africa, I don't care where we are. You've traveled around the world. What do 4-year-olds do everywhere in the world? They explore. They try new things. Do they ask lots of questions?
Yes.
Lots of questions?
Yes.
Do they observe the world real carefully?
Yeah.
Real carefully. Do they talk to just about anybody?
Yeah.
Are they always getting new ideas?
Yep.
They do all that stuff. Does it matter what country they're from? Do they still do that stuff?
They still do.
They do, don't they? So, how many of us were once 4 years old? This is the fundamental point, that we all have more creative capacity than we think. We were all once 4 years old. We all did this stuff that generates great new ideas that builds new businesses. The issue becomes, some of us may have had those skills, those behaviors, those practices that we used as kids, beaten right out of us. May have been in school, may have been at home, may have been at work, may have been a combination, and the muscles have become weak. So here we go. We're going to build some of those muscles, okay? First muscle, first point, innovation is a choice. So if you got a problem that you want to build a muscle on, how many of you in here have a problem for which you don't have a solution? Everybody? Everybody? You have a problem for which you don't have a solution? Yes?
Of course.
More than one?
Hundreds.
Hundreds. There we go. There we go. Now, think of that problem. I want you to get that in your mind just for a moment. It's got to be one you care about, one that you want to do something about, one that matters to you, one that when you wake up tomorrow, you're going to be thinking about it again. If you get that problem in mind, that's the first step to being a great innovator. You watch folks who get ideas that make a difference. They grab onto a problem and they don't let go. You've watched the saga of James Cameron recently, movie maker. What did he just do?
Went to the Mariana.
He flipped the submarine upside down and made it a torpedo instead of this level kind of thing. And he goes down 7 miles. How long ago was he thinking about that problem? He was 5 years. He was 5 years old. And he was trying to figure out, you know, what's going on down there in the undersea part of the world. And even though he may be this great movie maker, at the back of his mind, he had that problem for years, decades. He was trying to figure out, how do I do that? And you may have noticed in today's news, Jeff Bezos at Amazon, what problem was he curious about when he was 6 years old? Anybody notice what Amazon is doing? The F-1 engines from the Apollo rocket, when the rocket went to the moon, that left it off here from Miami, basically, in Florida, those rockets dropped into the sea. And Jeff Bezos was 5 or 6 years old when that happened. What was the question he was trying to figure out? Where are they? And he's honestly been thinking about that for decades, trying to figure out where are they, and now they discovered them. The issue is innovators have problems they care enough about that they will do something about it. Now, first step, you got your problem. Now, what do we do? Think outside of the box. There we go. It's not as easy as it seems sometimes. I love this picture, you know. Sometimes it's harder than we think to think outside of the box, and that's what innovative people do. We call it lateral thinking, we call it right brain thinking, creative thinking. Einstein called it combinatorial play. But if you get inside of an innovator's head, they are associating. That's the fundamental term we landed on. They think differently by putting things together other people don't put together. That's the way their heads work. And so, quick sort of example of this, VW had a really fun commercial series about associating and connecting the unconnected. Here we go. Here's an example. Okay. Who would have guessed turn a staircase into a piano? And by doing that, you solve a problem. People take the stairs, they don't take the escalator. That's how these folks think. They connect the unconnected. That's how Steve Jobs thinks. That's how he does it, connecting the unconnected. So you go back to 2001, you've got a computer, you've got MP3 music, and you've got the internet then. What do you get when you combine those three things? iTunes. You then add a couple of components. You've got a mini hard drive, really small, and you've got a combination lock. What do you get? iPod. What does the combination lock have to do with the iPod? You got it. I can see your fingers going around there. So basically, the designer is sitting in his office trying to figure out a problem, which is, now that I've got all my songs in this machine that's sitting in my pocket, how will people easily access them? He's literally playing, fumbling with this dial of a combination lock while he's thinking about his problem. And then all of a sudden, boom, the connection happens, and he associates the lock with the iPod, and he gets the mechanism for what he's trying to do. And that's how they think. That's how their heads work. They're connecting the unconnected. Now, it doesn't take, again, famous people. I was talking about this in South Africa a couple of months ago and ran across a guy named Gavin Semenowitz. He was 35. He had never been an entrepreneur before. He'd worked in a company that was a large organization. Bosses had never asked people in that company to get new ideas. One day he had a boss come along who was actually interested. How do you think we could do things better around here? What would be a creative approach to that? Gavin's initial response was, "You're crazy. Nobody's ever asked me for that idea before. I'm not giving it to you. Because I don't even know how to do it." His boss was persistent. He didn't give up. And ultimately, Gavin started getting ideas at his company to help them become better. Then Gavin got enough confidence to then venture out and maybe try a new business. Well, here was the problem. The problem was the following. You're trying to find a job. You look in the help wanted ads. What's the fundamental question most people want to know when they're looking for new work? It's related to, why do most people quit their old job? Bad boss. It's usually around, I've got a bad boss, I'm out of here. Money's related, but it's usually bad boss. So if I'm looking for a new job, what am I looking for?
Good boss.
Good boss. But it's like finding a good doctor. How do you know what's a good doctor or not? How do you know if I'm going to have a good boss or not? That was the problem. Here was Gavin's epiphany, his idea. What if we could connect 360-degree leadership feedback with help wanted ads? So I'm getting hired by the Cisneros groups. I'm getting hired into your part of the organization. Is it yours? Jorge? So Jorge's, I'm getting hired into his part. And I go online and I figure out, what do other people say about his leadership? And would I want to join that organization? Kind of a great idea, isn't it? Yeah. So he built this company called getagreatboss.com. It's incredibly successful. That's exactly what it does. Bosses can go online, have feedback done 360. If it's good feedback, they'll put it on and make it public. If it's horrible feedback, they can choose to not expose themselves. It's an interesting idea. Connecting the unconnected. Well, let's try it. I suspect you're fairly good at it, but let's give it a try just to get our brains into that space. We've got one brick. I want you in 90 seconds, just hold tight, but I'm going to tell you when to start, to figure out how many different creative ways could you use that one brick. It's not this big, normal-sized brick, but you only have one. How many different creative ways could you use it? You've got some paper that's sitting there, but don't do it individually. Just have one sheet of paper, one pen. You've got 3 or 4 people around you. Take 60 to 90 seconds. I'll tell you when to stop. And generate as many possible uses of that single brick you can imagine. Be as creative as you can be. 3 or 4 people. Number them so we can count them up. On your mark, get set, go.